A single missing person is a tragedy, but when dozens vanish at once, it becomes something darker, something harder to explain. From students seized in the night, to families who simply vanish from their homes, to entire crews swallowed by ice and sea, mass disappearances defy logic and leave behind more questions than answers. On this episode, we explore 5 of the most haunting group vanishings ever recorded. In Mexico, 43 students are taken by force and never seen again. In Nigeria, nearly 300 schoolgirls are kidnapped, sparking a global outcry. In Argentina, a rural family disappears without a trace. In the Arctic, 2 ships and 129 men vanish into the ice, their fates unknown for more than a century. And off the coast of Libya, an entire refugee boat, 243 souls, disappears into thin air. Each story is disturbing. Each story is real. And each reminds us that in a world of GPS, satellites, and surveillance, people can still vanish, together, without a trace. September 26, 2014 was a night like any other in southern Mexico, when a group of 43 students from the Ayotzinapa Rural Teachers College set out on a bus ride that would end in one of the darkest and most confounding disappearances in modern history. The 43 students were headed to Mexico City to honor the anniversary of the 1968 Tlatelolco massacre, a brutal government crackdown on protesting students decades earlier. To get there, they followed a common college tradition, commandeering local buses as student activists had done for years. But something went horribly wrong. As the buses made their way through the city of Iguala, they were stopped at multiple roadblocks by local police. Shots rang out in the darkness. Panic, confusion, and then silence. By the time the sun rose in the morning, all 43 students were missing. At first, officials claimed they had been detained by corrupt municipal police working with a local drug cartel called Guerreros Unidos, who allegedly mistook the students for members of a rival gang. According to this version of events, the students were handed over, murdered, and their bodies incinerated in a massive fire. But that story began to unravel almost immediately. Independent investigators, including a team of international forensic experts, concluded that the mass incineration was scientifically impossible. There was no evidence of such a fire, no remains, no trace of anything. Then came the whispers that the buses may have been carrying illegal substances for a cartel, that the students unknowingly had been involved in something they were never meant to know about, and that the Mexican army, present in the area and monitoring the events, did nothing to stop what was happening. Some reports even suggest the military may have been directly involved. For the families of the missing, hope turned to heartbreak, and then to anger and fury. For years they demanded answers. Their marches filled city streets. Their faces, holding pictures of their missing children, became symbols of a nation's failure to protect its own people. Under a new administration, a fresh investigation was promised. A truth commission was formed. Arrests were made, including cartel leaders, military personnel, and a former attorney general. But even now, over a decade later, the truth remains buried beneath layers of corruption, fear, and silence. Only 3 of the 43 students have been officially identified. The rest, still missing. It was one of the most ambitious journeys of the 19th century, and one of its most tragic. In 1845, British explorer Sir John Franklin set sail from England with 2 ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, and a crew of 129 men. Their mission was to complete the final uncharted stretch of the fabled Northwest Passage, a sea route linking the Atlantic and Pacific through the icy waters of the Canadian Arctic. The stakes were high. For Britain, dominating the Northwest Passage meant securing a vital trade route and cementing its maritime supremacy. The expedition also sought to gather scientific data to better understand the Earth's magnetic field, science that could potentially revolutionize navigation. But Franklin and his men never came back. The ships became trapped in thick sea ice in the Victoria Strait, near King William Island, in what is now Nunavut. After more than a year of being icebound, the crew abandoned both vessels in April 1848. By then, at least 24 men, including Franklin himself, had already died. The remaining survivors, led by second-in-command Francis Crozier and Captain James Fitzjames, attempted to march to the Canadian mainland. None were ever seen alive again. What happened after that is still pieced together from fragments. Pushed by mounting public pressure, the British Admiralty launched rescue missions beginning in 1848. Over the next several decades, search expeditions uncovered scattered clues, skeletal remains, abandoned campsites, cryptic notes, and artifacts, literally frozen in time. Studies in recent years suggest a slow, agonizing decline in health for the men before death. The men likely succumbed to a combination of hypothermia, starvation, scurvy, and possibly lead poisoning from poorly salted tin rations. Traces of zinc deficiency were also found in some remains. Even more disturbing, some of the recovered bones bore cut marks, evidence that cannibalism may have taken place in the desperate final stages of survival. Then, over 150 years after the expedition vanished, history surfaced. Literally. In 2014, a Parks Canada team discovered the wreck of HMS Erebus in the Queen Maud Gulf. Just 2 years later, the Terror was found, astonishingly well preserved, in Terror Bay, south of King William Island. Today, these wrecks are protected as a combined National Historic Site of Canada. In the summer of 2014, a boat carrying at least 243 refugees disappeared somewhere off the coast of Libya. No bodies were found. No debris was located. No survivors. Not a single confirmed detail about what happened next. The passengers, mostly Eritrean men, women, and children, a country in Northeast Africa, were fleeing one of the world's most repressive regimes. For $1,600 apiece, they entrusted their lives to smugglers who promised them safe passage across the Mediterranean, from the Libyan city of Al-Khums to Europe. But they never arrived. The smugglers were known. Miasho Tesfamariam, who arranged logistics and payments, and 3 others, Ibrahim, Jaber, and Jamal el-Saudi, a well-connected smuggling organizer in Libya. Tesfamariam would later be arrested, but his story was inconsistent. He claimed he didn't actually witness the boat's departure. But here's the strangest part. A ship that large, carrying hundreds of people, should leave at least some evidence that it sank. Even the most tragic Mediterranean shipwrecks left wreckage, bodies, something. This boat left nothing. An investigative reporter named Eric Reedy began chasing the mystery, using blogging and crowdsourcing to try and piece together the fragments. He would end up partnering with Medium editor Bobby Johnson, and together they launched the Ghost Boat Project to try and track what happened to the missing. At one point, there was hope. A phone call claimed that some of the passengers were detained in Tunisia, but that too was a dead end. Experts were baffled. Eritrean activist Alganesh Fiseha, herself a survivor of the regime the refugees fled, said it best. It is impossible that they disappeared into thin air. And yet, over a decade later, the ghost boat and the people aboard it remain just that, ghosts. It was January 2002 in Argentina's Entre Rios province when the Gill family disappeared. Ruben, his wife Margarita, and their 4 children lived on La Candelaria, a sprawling 500-hectare ranch located near the tiny village of Crucecitas Septimas. The ranch was owned by a man named Alfonso Guete, and the Gills worked the land as caretakers, scraping together a humble but stable life. On January 12, 2002, Ruben and Margarita took their children into town to visit a friend named Maximo Vega in Viale. To all accounts, it was an ordinary visit. Nothing seemed unusual. But after that night, no one ever saw them again. It wasn't until April, 3 months later, that Alfonso Guete finally returned the multiple phone calls from the Gill family's relatives, who at this point were concerned after not having heard from their family since January. Guete claimed the Gills had taken an extended vacation, something he had supposedly approved in January. But to their loved ones, that explanation didn't sit right. They found that Margarita hadn't collected her last paycheck from the school where she worked. The family didn't even have a vehicle. Then the first strange clue. On January 13th, the day after the last time the family was seen, calls were made from Ruben's cell phone to an unknown woman in Rosario. Authorities were never able to trace her, and Ruben's phone remained active, inexplicably, for over a year following. Ruben's sister, Luisa, filed the initial missing persons report with local police, but the investigation quickly fell into obscurity. Meanwhile, suspicions began to mount that the family hadn't left willingly. In 2006, a lawyer named Elvio Garzon publicly accused local police of interfering in the case. He even claimed that some of the same officers had been linked to 2 other disappearances, an accountant and an architect, in the same region of Argentina. But this explosive claim was never formally investigated. It wasn't until 2008 6 years after their disappearance, that investigators finally returned to La Candelaria with forensic tools. They tore up floorboards. They dug out wells. They sprayed luminol, a chemical that reveals traces of blood invisible to the naked eye. And what they found was disturbing. Multiple human blood samples were found. However, there were no matches to the Gill family. Forensic entomologists that visited the ranch noted the presence of certain insects, species known to hover near decomposing human bodies. Everyone seemed to agree that something had happened on that ranch. But the question of where the Gills were remained. In the years that followed, leads were pursued across multiple Argentine provinces, and even into Paraguay and Brazil. Theories spread of the possibilities that the family had been forcibly kidnapped, or there was a violent confrontation with someone on the ranch, or even a personal dispute, like a secret affair that turned deadly. But nothing ever stuck. Then, in 2018, a rural contractor named Armando Nani came forward. He claimed that on January 14, 2002, just one day after the family disappeared, he saw Ruben Gill in distress, angry about having to dig wells on the property. That clue led investigators to a new search of a water well on the land, but they only found animal bones. Nani also mentioned a nearby stream and said parts of the terrain had clearly been disturbed. Firefighters examined it. They confirmed that someone had been digging, but they found no sign of the missing family. Meanwhile, Ruben's brother Osvaldo and Margarita's mother Adelia begged authorities to investigate the basement of the main house. They alleged that the ranch's owner, Alfonso Guete, had once sealed it and built over it. Guete himself maintained that the family had gone to Santa Fe to visit relatives or had headed northeast in search of work. He claimed they left behind money, documents, even personal items. But when the family's relatives were finally allowed inside the house, they found no such belongings. What they did find were burned mattresses and blood mixed into the dirt. According to Ruben's sister, Luisa, Guete admitted to burning the mattresses because they were, quote, stained with blood, unquote. But Guete was never charged. And in 2016, any chance of questioning him again was lost forever, when on June 16th, Alfonso Guete died in a car crash. To this day, the fate of the Gill family, Ruben, Margarita, and their 4 children, Maria Ofelia, Osvaldo Jose, Sofia Margarita, and Carlos Daniel, remains one of Argentina's most haunting unsolved mysteries. 6 lives, gone, with no evidence that they ever even existed. In the darkness of April 14, 2014, the quiet town of Chibok, Nigeria, a small majority Christian village, was jolted awake by the sound of engines, shouting, and gunfire. Hours earlier, warnings had come from neighboring towns. Convoys of armed men were heading toward Chibok, but no help ever arrived. What happened next would become one of the most haunting mass kidnappings of the 21st century. Under the cover of night, fighters from the Islamic extremist group Boko Haram stormed the government girls' secondary school. Disguised in military uniforms and posing as Nigerian soldiers, they told the girls they had come to evacuate them, to protect them. Instead, they burned homes, exchanged gunfire with the outnumbered local garrison, and forced nearly 300 schoolgirls, aged 16 to 18, into waiting trucks. Some were crammed into vehicles. Others were forced to march into the wilderness. Their destination was the dense, hostile expanse of the Sambisa forest, a place where Boko Haram had established fortified camps deep in its trees. But what makes the Chibok abductions especially chilling isn't just the brutality of the crime, it's how preventable it might have been. The school had already been closed for weeks due to safety concerns, yet the girls had returned, many from nearby towns, to take their final physics exams. And according to Amnesty International, the Nigerian military had received a warning about the incoming attack 4 hours before it began. 4 hours. But no reinforcements were sent. In the days that followed, frantic parents formed search parties and ventured into the forest themselves. Armed with nothing but hope, they returned empty-handed. 57 girls managed to escape, leaping from moving trucks, hiding in the brush under the cover of night. The rest just disappeared. Some of the girls were said to have been split up, forced into marriage, used as human shields, or indoctrinated into Boko Haram's ranks. Others were believed to be held near Lake Chad or in camps high in the Gorsi Mountains. For years, sightings trickled in, grainy footage, whispered testimonies, but most were never seen again. The Nigerian government's shifting statements, initial denials, and miscounted numbers only deepened the despair. The world watched in horror. Hashtags spread, protests erupted. "Bring back our girls" became a global cry. But as the years wore on, the voices began to fade. A decade later, over 90 of the girls are still missing, and a generation carries the weight of what was lost on that night.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Fireside Unsolved. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe to help the channel grow. Until next time, take it easy and be easy, you filthy bastards.